It's difficult to know when someone plays differently than the solver, if it's a tiny error or a big error. Well, I looked at this scenario, and this line that Negreanu took is actually a 10 big blind error. Hello everyone, I'm Jonathan Little for PokerCoaching.com, and we have another hand from the 200-400 Cadillac of Poker battle between Doug Polk and Daniel Negreanu. They are playing 200-400 Texas style. Doug Polk raises it up with the pocket nines. Negreanu opts to 3-bet the king 7 suited, which is fine some portion of the time. Doug Polk calls the nines, and we go to the flop. King 5-2. Negreanu nails it. What should Negreanu do? Well, this is a spot where when you 3-bet before the flop, you should be continuation betting a pretty large chunk of the time, usually using a somewhat small size. That is exactly what Negreanu does. Let's take a look at his flop strategy. As we see king 7 suited here, opts to bet tiny, a third pot, the vast majority of the time, so perfectly fine and standard for him. Over around to Doug Polk. What should he do? Don't fold. Don't fold. I'm sure there are some weak type poker players out there watching this right now thinking, oh no, he could have a king. Look, he does have a king. Why would you call if you know he has a king? But then you don't realize, oh, we don't know he has a king. He could have ace queen or queen 8 or all sorts of other nonsense. So this is a spot where the nines have a very, very trivially easy call. Take a look at pocket nines. It calls literally 99.9% of the time, okay? We are not folding the pocket nines. We're not raising them. We are calling every single time. Some people think, oh, you should raise to find out where you stand. But no. That's not how good fundamentally sound poker works. Notice here, Polk should be calling the vast majority of the time. When he is raising, only 8.59% of the time. It's mostly with king queen, right? Notice king queen is a very strong top pair. Also king jack and king 10 sometimes. Pocket 2s, pocket 5s. These are all sets, right? So he's raising with the majority of his very strong hands. And then he's also raising with some gut shots down here. Right? Gut shots down here. And a smattering of bluffs. Smattering of bluffs here. Stuff like queen jack, queen 10, queen 9. I have to imagine these have a queen of clubs in them. So that's what he's doing in this scenario. But the vast majority of hands are calling, including his very clear marginal made hands like pocket nines. Nothing to see here. All right. This is where this hand gets interesting. Turn is the king of clubs. Take a second and ask yourself, what would you do in Negreanu's shoes when you turn 3 of a kind, but the flush is available? 3 clubs are on the board here. Would you check, bet small like a third pot, bet medium like 2/3 pot, or put in the overbet for about $18,000 into the $13,000 pot? What would you do? Clearly, remember, you don't know that Doug Polk has the pocket nines. Take a second, write it in the comment section below this video. Go ahead, do it. I'll wait a second. Did you do it? Good. This is a neat spot that I think a lot of people mess up. And while the king 7 for trips is clearly a very strong hand, if you bet here and get substantial action, you're usually in pretty bad shape, either against a better king or against a flush, all of which are in Doug Polk's range. So you have to be very, very cautious in this scenario in Daniel Negreanu's shoes. But he goes ahead and makes the 2/3 pot bet. And if we go here and look at what the solver does in this scenario, take a look at king 7 on the turn, right? When king 7 does opt to bet, which is only 42% of the time, it uses a tiny 20% pot bet. Notice that no hands in Negreanu's range, for the most part, you see only 4% of hands are opting to bet using a big size. So if Negreanu is going to bet here, he should be betting small, but checking here is perfectly fine. Using this big bet size is not a good play because what's going to happen is you're going to make all of Polk's hands that are drawing thin to dead fold, and you're only going to get called by kings, which you're not in all that great shape against. Also, flushes, which you're not in great shape against. And flush draws are going to continue as well. And you may say, don't you want to price out the flush draws? Yeah, you do, but even if the flush card comes on the river, it's not like you can just happily check fold, because every once in a while, Polk's going to run a bluff on the river and get you off of your hand, even when the 4 clubs comes. Over round 2, Doug Polk, he opts to call, which again is the only play with all pocket 9s, not just pocket 9s with a club, but again, this is a very clear marginal made hand, right? As we see here as well, which is pretty interesting. Polk actually has no raising range. Kind of cool to see. That's presumably because whenever Negreanu uses this bigger bet size, he has really strong hands. Like, look, pocket 5s is betting big, pocket 2s is betting big, and then just a smattering of bluffs are betting big, mainly clubs, right? Like 1 club hands. So whenever Negreanu's betting big, Polk has to presume he's going to be very, very polarized. However, if Polk knew Negreanu was betting much more linear, then this strategy would be very different. And this is where it's very important that you do your best to try to figure out your opponent's actual strategy and don't just blindly assume they're playing the GTO strategy, because that may lead you down a slightly different decision tree. Anyway, Polk does call. River is, oh, hello, a 9. Now on the river, Negreanu goes for a bet. He bets a little bit more than half of his money. As we see in this scenario, he should be checking 99.4% of the time when he has the King 7 suited. Now, of course, he shouldn't have the King 7 suited all that often given this line, because presumably he would have used a different bet size, right? But he does take this line a tiny, tiny fraction of the time. But if he does have this hand, he should be betting, or he should be checking on this river, because in this scenario, it's too easy for Doug Polk to have a flush, which you don't want to get stacked against, or a busted club draw, which you really want to give a chance to bluff. And when you bet here, it doesn't give Polk a very easy, clear chance to bluff. So this was a pretty big error by Negreanu. Someone posted in the comments, yes, I do read all the comments, feel free to comment away, that it's difficult to know when someone plays differently than the solver, if it's a tiny error or a big error. Well, I looked at this scenario, and this line that Negreanu took is actually a 10 big blind error. This play, on average, cost him $4,000, okay? Substantial error. Can't make that any more clear. A lot of people look at this and think, oh man, trips, what are you going to do? It's heads up. Just blast your money in. But no. You do still have to be somewhat cautious, especially when your opponent's range should be pretty strong, as Polk's range is here. Because whenever Negreanu bets here, what's he really going to call within Polk's shoes? Right? I mean, let's go over here and look at the solver. And we see here that Polk will call with 8s and 7s and 6s sometimes, but even most of them fold. So Polk's mainly just calling with a king, most of which you lose to. Notice you only beat King 6, King 4, and King 3, but you lose to 8, 10, Jack, and Queen, right? So you lose to the majority of the kings, so that's not good. Random ace 9, ace of clubs 9, if Polk does have that, a small portion of the time does end up calling. So you get value from that sometimes. You get value from the ace 5 with the ace of clubs sometimes. Notice these hands here are all flushes you lose to, right? So all of these hands in green, a large chunk of them you actually beat. Funny enough, the line that Negreanu has taken is so strong that Polk actually should consider folding out some of his better kings, which, you know, seems kind of insane. But when your opponent does take such a very strong polarized line, you should start making pretty big folds. That said, I don't think Polk ever folds a better king in this scenario. But as you see, really, all of these hands here in red and green, these are all flushes. Polk's calling all of these flushes or raising all of these flushes. So this is a spot where whenever Negreanu does take this betting line, he is lighting his money on fire. Even though trips are normally very, 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 very good, this is not one of those spots. So anyway, round to Polk. Clearly he's going to go all in with this hand. 9s are the nuts. And when it gets back to Negreanu, should he call it off? Well, funny enough, I know that like this line is basically never taken. If Negreanu does have this hand, he should actually fold this 60% of the time, 59.6% of the time, and call it 40% of the time. Again, I know this line is rarely taken, so who knows? But if we take a look at this, like if he does have King Jack, he should fold. King 10, he should fold. King Queen, he should fold. Lower kings calls about half the time. King 3 folds a lot. So you see, once we get here, these kings actually should strongly consider folding whenever you bet the river like this and get raised, because you've taken such an incredibly strong line and your opponent's giving you such amazing odds that this hand essentially becomes one of the absolute worst hands in your, call it, value betting range. And if you have one of the worst hands in your quote-unquote value betting range, then you should at least consider folding. So is Polk ever bluffing here? That's the tough question. And I don't know the answer to that. We've seen Doug Polk get pretty aggressive every once in a while. It's interesting because I think Doug Polk somewhat uses a strategy of taking aggressive lines when they make logical sense, but really not getting all that out of line besides that. And right here, given the way Negreanu's been playing, I don't think this is a spot where you want to be running too many bluffs. So if anything, I would venture to say Negreanu probably wants to be over-folding in this spot, which would probably lead him to folding out the kings. But Negreanu does take this line, and he calls and gets stacked. This looks like a cooler, and to be fair, to some extent, it is a bit of a cooler. However, very importantly, the way this hand should have played out is Negreanu should have bet flop, Polk's going to call. Turn, Negreanu's going to check, Polk's going to check, right? River, Negreanu's going to check or bet. If he checks, Polk bets, he just calls. If he bets, he gets raised, he just calls. Either way, he doesn't get stacked. Or if he does get stacked, at least he's given Polk plenty of room to run bluffs. Whenever he plays it this way, he kind of forces Polk to play decently well, and that is not really what you want to do. So tough spot for Negreanu, where I know this feels like a cooler, but at the end of the day, the turn play was not played especially, or the turn was not played especially well, and that resulted in Negreanu getting stacked when Polk got bailed out on the river when he made the full house. Obviously, if Polk doesn't make the full house, this hand is not nearly as interesting, because on the river, Negreanu would have bet, Polk would have probably folded, and that would have been the end of the hand. But, you know, every once in a while, your opponent's going to run hot, and they're going to crush you. So that's me for today. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, take 1 second for me. You've been here for 10 minutes or something like that. Take 1 second for me. Click like, click subscribe down below. I would appreciate it. Click the notification bell. That way you know whenever I am back with more free educational content for you. Have a great day. Check out my training site, pokercoaching.com. We are uploading numerous amounts. Numerous amounts, is that English? We're uploading tons of high-level content from many of the absolute best poker players in the world for you. So check that out, pokercoaching.com. Have a great day. Good luck in your games, and I'll talk to you soon. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want more strategy lessons, pre-flop charts, and interactive quizzes, make sure you get your free membership to pokercoaching.com right now at pokercoaching.com/free. I'll talk to you next time.